Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. We're still in palindrome territory here? Yeah, I guess so. All right, all through the 20s of May, as I recall. And it's the Tuesday after Labor Day. And so, therefore, the Tuesday that feels like a Monday. And in addition to feeling like a Monday, it feels like a disorganized Monday. So isn't that great? Everything, all the normal patterns are off. And it's reflected in the beginning of this show. I don't know. For whatever reason, the music wasn't running, though I thought it was. And soundboard was very hesitant to start up. And I had to kind of try to force start the soundboard awake. And I think it was a little iffy. And the sound, well, let's just say we'll fix it in post. I don't even know whether we can or will. I think it's actually pretty easy to do. And we'll rely on that. For the rest of you who are listening live, well, I don't know. Welcome. All right, so it's the end of a long weekend, and weekends are, of course, lousy in the Trump era because, I don't know, people aren't busy, and I guess he thinks he can distract everybody with nonsense over the weekend. Plus, it was a holiday weekend, and it was a, solemn national-type holiday weekend, which means, of course, he ruins everything by showing up at services that are meant to be about other people and saying me. And it was a double shot this weekend. It was graduation from the United States Military Academy at West Point, just West Point for short, it's fine. And Trump showed up to give the speech, I guess, and I don't know. I mean, mixed bag, I'm sure, among military families. There are some who probably thought, oh, my God, this is the greatest thing ever because Donald Trump. There are probably even some who just thought this is the greatest thing ever because the president, even if the president is, this guy. And then, of course, there are surely some that are just like, why me? Of all the luck, at my own graduation, I got to have this guy. And sure enough, he delivered that speech, in case you were listening, and I hope you weren't. I didn't try listening, although I saw all the clips that were circulating, and then, I don't know, I was in a car trip, and I thought, let me take a look at the transcript of this speech. Now that the White House has stopped posting transcripts of his remarks, largely I think because if you read them, you'll think, oh my God, I don't think he's functioning, because he's not. But other people create transcripts, and that's a helpful thing. Sometimes it's a little difficult to tell what he's saying because he's garbled or scrambles his words or slurs his speech, or the words don't hang together, they don't make any sense, and it's difficult to know what to put down on paper. But yeah, I read the West Point transcript. I haven't yet read the Memorial Day at Arlington Cemetery transcript, but I understand it went pretty much the same, and it's really something that you feel dumber when you have read it. I mean, I really think we lost IQ points in anybody who actually read it, and that would include me, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit over, well, this Monday/Tuesday recovery. It was really something, and largely about him, of course. I think at one point he rambles. The first clip that made it my way was when he starts telling a story. I sometimes tell a story, and I guess I'm going to tell it now, basically. And I don't really know what the point of the story was, but I don't know if there was a point to anything. There were a few laugh out loud moments. Not, he didn't make a joke, and they did well. It was things that were supposed to be serious, I think. And probably a good, there might have been as many as 10 like nobody's ever seen before variants thrown in to the thing. I got the sense that he had some bullet points maybe on a teleprompter, and then he just riffed because if anybody wrote this speech, I don't know. They may need to see somebody about a CAT scan if they wrote it. But anyway, he seemed to be trying to give a list of positive attributes that he thought perhaps most West Point graduates had because they were strongly strong winners or something. And but if they didn't have them, they should go get them and cultivate them. And then he would sort of tell a story about some of them, or would remind him about something. And I don't know which point it was, but basically the list was, be smart and try hard and fight and be a winner and remember important things or whatever. And it was really bizarre. And then he would give a stem winder of a story about each one, and then he'd come back and go third, as though people remembered that it's 20 minutes since he launched into a story about the second point. But he made sure to come back to it. So I do think he may have had a bullet-pointed list to work from. And also interesting was at some point he decided, and remember, never give up. Never keep trying no matter how hard. Never give up. And then he says that actually should have been on the list, which is amazing because it was such a dumb, mundane list that how could you have forgotten, try hard, be strong, whatever. But he did. And he went back and did. So the stem winder speech that or the side story that made the clips was, and again, I don't know what attribute he was trying to illustrate, but I think he was basically, oh yeah, right, you got to have momentum, which okay, go get some, go to the momentum store. And he told the story of the builder of Levittown, or several Levitt towns, and what was the guy's name who built? Was it William Levitt? I don't remember what the Levittown builder's first name was. Yeah, William. There we go. I'm just looking it up just to check. Anyway, big success in real estate, so of course he's going to talk about that. And I guess the point of the story about momentum was, he tries to illustrate he had big success. He built so many houses, thousands, and he had a huge successful company. And eventually he sold the company. Big conglomerate came to and offered him a lot of money, and he sold the company. And he went and he lived the good life, and he sold his little boat, and he bought a huge yacht, and he got a divorce from his wife, and he married a trophy wife. Oh, trophy wives. Sometimes those don't work out. It's not so great sometimes, trophy wives. And he lived the good life in Monte Carlo for a while, and it goes on and on and on about all of this. And then, I don't even know, I don't know if any of this is true or not, but the company, 10, 15 years later, they decide, they're not making the money they thought they would make in this business. And they said to him, it's not for us. It doesn't work. And you got to understand. Levitt, when they were building Levittown, another side story about this, and he goes on to say that, and I'm not sure what this is supposed to illustrate, but maybe frugality. He used to walk the job site every night, and he would pick up every nail and every bolt, and he would put those in the next day, those would be used in building a big, beautiful house. And he never got around, I don't think, to saying what he meant was, being frugal, don't waste anything, mind every dollar, mind every penny in your business. But then he went on to say, I don't know. So I guess the conglomerate that bought the Levitt construction business, which was alleged in this speech to have been Gulf and Western for some reason. Well, they weren't making them, and they said to him, maybe you want to buy it back. We'll sell it to you cheap. And he bought it back, but his momentum was gone, and he never had the same kind of success. And then he goes on, the trophy wife leaves him, and now he's got no money. He's bankrupt. And I remember, and another story, I'm at a party on Fifth Avenue. And it was the most successful people are at this party. In fact, I was doing very well too. I had to be doing very well. I was at this party. That was amazing insight into his brain. I know I'm successful. I've been invited to a party for successful people. If you've ever seen Dinner for Schmucks, I think you know what's happening here. But he notes that, there I am. I'm having a great time at this party, and I see all alone in a corner, sitting by himself. It's Bill Levitt. So I went over to say hi, and he says, hello, Donald, because he knew me because I was in the business. I was very young then. And I said, how are you doing, Bill? And he said, not so good, Donald. Not so good. He's bankrupt. He lost all his money. All his money. His wife, his trophy wife is gone. His business is gone. He's bankrupt at this party, which only successful. Anyway, the point is, you got to have momentum. So have momentum. I don't know. I'm telling you this to try to simulate the feeling of what it must be like to be a West Point graduate and be so spectacularly disrespected. It's your day. You're graduating from a very prestigious military institution. You're about to be commissioned as an officer in the United States Army. Whether you're still happy about that or not, I don't know. You started, it was Biden. Maybe you thought it was going to be different. Or maybe you're happy. I don't know. But instead you got this. And the speech is not even rah-rah standard stuff or about the honor code. I think at one point he's listing off people who had different accomplishments. 26 of these great graduates got and I think the academic honor was he know I don't know anything about it. Maybe this is the right name for it. Maybe not. This was it the Star Wreath, and 26 of the graduates, the highest academic honors, the Star Wreaths. Stand, everybody who got this prestigious award, stand up. Let's see if anybody stands up who shouldn't be standing, which he says to the honor code people. I accuse you of academic dishonesty right at your graduation. Let's see. And wow, 26, that's great. Four of these members are going to be Rhodes Scholars, which is tied for the record for West Point. Wow, 4. Wow. And then he goes on to say something, and then he calls out a guy who he broke the record for the fastest overnight march, and he smashed the international record, and he calls this kid up, which, I don't know, why not? Although, maybe a Rhodes Scholar could be called up. No, the guy with the physical accomplishment, and he says, say something to the crowd, and the guy doesn't know what to say. But anyway, cool. Have a good graduation, anybody. It was interesting. He says, it's been a long, tough 5 years. Which should have been a hint. But anyway, it takes some time every once in a while to get through any college. So it was a big disaster, and I just wondered whether anybody, in the audience was like, this is a big accomplishment. I thought there would be some more about, us and what we're doing here and the tradition of serving in the armed forces. But it wasn't quite as bad as his Boy Scout Jamboree speech about trophy wives, I think, because that was about orgies on yachts, and those kids were even younger. I don't know. Anyway, he went on to give a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, also largely about him. Also, blatant attacks on Biden. There was a couple hints of that. At West Point, too. You're serving in the greatest army, which was the worst army last year, about 6 months ago. Worst army in the world. Now it's the best. And the reason being, of course, telling the graduates of the military academy, the Army graduates, we're building big, beautiful airplanes like no one's ever seen. In fact, you can't see them at all. They're stealth. They tell me the shape of the wing. One way you can see it, one way you can't. I'm not so sure. Great. Commander-in-Chief. Wonderful. Well, if you don't like that, we're building ships, big, beautiful ships. Yeah, that's the Navy. I don't know. So he had nothing for the Army guys. We're making more of those little green plastic guys like you that you can have fake battles with, but we'll be planning those battles, so the real ones will go very well. There should be. Let me say one thing. Now, we need fewer of you guys with the binoculars and more of you with the guns. Anyway. So that was the big weekend speeches. He, did the same thing. Biden, horrible, terrible. He wants to destroy this country at Arlington National Cemetery. I haven't read that transcript yet, and I'm not sure if I'm going to, because you can feel that the show is dumber, in fact, probably today. And maybe that's the reason why we were so slow in getting things started. All right. Well, we can't be blamed for that. He did it. It's his fault. All right. I have a couple of interesting stories and some terrible, stupid stories to share with you. Just by way of update, nothing, I don't think, legislatively over the weekend. Everybody had to go home and be in parades. So the House has passed the big, beautiful bill, and no one is still quite entirely sure what's in it. And there's rumors of Senate holdouts among the Republican holdouts among the senators, and some demands that changes be made. And apparently this is giving what's his name over in the House, Johnson, a big headache, because he was just kind of hoping that the Senate would rubber stamp what the House did, which never happens. I don't know if he knows how things go in Congress, but apparently he's going to get a rude awakening to this. Top Republicans, it says here in The Guardian, threaten to block Trump's spending bill if national debt is not reduced. There's, I guess, some Republican joker in the Senate realized that those guys were against rising national debt. And I don't know if they got the memo that we were just kidding about that, but I guess not. Ed Pilkington has this story, and it says here, prominent U.S. senators warn Trump to, quote, get serious. Wow. About addressing budget deficit, or they will block, quote, beautiful bill. And they just mean we're going to block Bill in the hallways and not let him through. It has nothing to do with the big, beautiful bill act. Donald Trump, the president guy, has been warned by fiscal hawks within his own party in the U.S. Senate that he must, quote, get serious about cutting government spending and reducing the national debt, or else they will block the passage of his signature tax-cutting legislation known by him as the big, beautiful bill. And remember, we're reading in The Guardian, so they sometimes, throw in a little extra things like, oh, yeah, this is the Senate. It's the upper chamber. Like, we know that maybe inherently, although you should probably remind Americans, too. Ron Johnson apparently is the serious, or the guy who demands that he gets serious, and a fiscal hawk. Senator from Wisconsin, and among the dumber guys they've got, who rose to prominence as a fiscal hardliner with the Tea Party movement. Oh, yeah. Well, he issued a warning to the president on Sunday, but the president was busy on Sunday and didn't listen. By the way, yes. I almost forgot. I did see in passing on social media, and I don't know, I haven't verified this. Maybe that's why I didn't stick it right at the front. I didn't grab an article about it, but I did hear that Trump did skip what was apparently tradition when you give the commencement address, I guess as president maybe, at the military academy. You stay, and there's a receiving line, and any graduate who wants to wait in the receiving line and shake the hand of the president, and maybe everybody who gives the speeches, I don't know. You can do that, but you can't do that if it's Donald Trump, because Donald Trump wanted to leave, and he told everybody, but I have to leave now because I have to deal with China and Russia. And I think he may have been tongue-in-cheek. It's possible. He was quite open about what he was doing, but apparently he skipped the receiving line and stepped onto the helicopter and was whisked away. And hours later, I mean, he's the president. Everybody's going to find out what you did. It went straight to the golf course. And again, there could be lots of cadets who maybe were relieved. Like, I guess I have to stand in line and shake the hand of the president because one day I might be up for a promotion and he might reject me because he, I don't know, someone tells him I didn't stay and shake his hand. Who knows? But then he leaves and goes golfing, and all the graduates get to go on and have their parties. But surely some of them were insulted. Anyway, right. So where were we? Oh, we're in the middle of the Guardian article about the legislation. Asked by CNN's State of the Union, the show. That's who did the asking? I heard the guy on that show was out selling his book. Well, anyway, he was asked whether his faction, Ron Johnson's faction, had the numbers to halt the bill, and he replied, I think we have enough to stop the process until the president gets serious about spending reduction and reducing the deficit. Well, that's not going to happen, so we'll find out when MAGA pressures you to change your mind. Trump has invested a large portion of his political capital in a massive package. It extends the 2017 tax cuts from his first administration in return for about $1 trillion in benefits cuts, including reductions to the health insurance scheme for low-income families, Medicaid, British paper again, and to Supplemental Nutrition Assistance or Program, or SNAP, food stamps. The bill squeaked through the U.S. House by just one vote on Thursday. Now it faces a perilous welcome in the upper legislative chamber. Sunday's admonitions from prominent senators, can't figure out who the other ones are yet, angered by the failure to address the budget deficit, bodes ill for Trump's agenda given the tightness of the Republican congressional majorities. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune can afford to lose only 3 votes from among his party's 53. Thune has indicated that changes to the bill might be needed to bring refuseniks, nice, on side. Oh, and there's a little Britishism for you, too. Bring them on side. That, in turn, could present the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, no relation, I guess, to Ron Johnson. They didn't throw that in there, with a headache. There's the headache I told you about. The House will have to approve any changes made in the Senate under the process of budget reconciliation, which allows spending packages to be fast-tracked through Congress, avoiding a filibuster of 60 votes. And more or less, the final contents of the bill will need to be blessed by both chambers, with Democrats almost certain to vote unanimously in opposition. The House Speaker renewed his plea to his Senate colleagues on Sunday to go lightly with him. He encouraged them on CBS News' Face the Nation to make as few modifications as possible, remembering that I have a very delicate balance on our very diverse Republican caucus over in the House. It is not diverse. But Senate budget hawks do not appear to be in the mood for compromise. Ron Johnson estimated the bill would add up to $4 trillion to the federal deficit, a calculation that is broadly in line with the latest analysis from the CBO. Johnson added a rare note of, by the way, it should be emphasized, this is not Ron Johnson's calculation. The reason his calculation is broadly in line with that of the CBO is that he took the CBO's analysis and said it's going to add $4 trillion. Trust me, he's not doing his own math. Johnson added a rare note of personal criticism of Trump from a congressional Republican. He said that while Trump might not be worried about the national debt, I am extremely worried about that. I don't see the personal criticism there. He added, we are mortgaging our children's future. It's wrong. It's immoral. It has to stop. I guess they must have thought he meant Donald Trump is wrong and immoral. But ask him about that today, and he'll say, oh, no. Someone else is wrong and immoral. Surely not Donald Trump. Another key Tea Party Senator, Rand Paul from Kentucky, has also been vocal over the deficit. He laid into the spending cuts contained in the big, beautiful bill, telling Fox News Sunday that in his view they were wimpy and anemic and would explode the debt. I'm not really sure how to reconcile those things. Like wimpy and anemic makes it sound like he wanted more. Oh, the cuts, maybe. The spending cuts are wimpy and anemic. Okay. Well, other influential Republican senators have been expressing concern about the numbers of Americans who would lose access to health care coverage as part of the legislation's cuts to Medicaid. According to CBO, almost 8 million people would be thrown off the benefit. Other estimates much higher, of course. There, at least I've seen people give their own estimates. Speaker Johnson, the other guy, tried to dismiss the concern, telling CBS News that 1.4 million of those vulnerable people were illegal aliens receiving benefits anyway, and a further 4.8 million were able-bodied individuals choosing not to work when gaming the system. An analysis by the nonpartisan factcheck.org found that the claim that 1.4 million undocumented migrants were on Medicaid was false. People living in the U.S. without immigration papers are not eligible for the federal program other than to receive emergency medical treatment. Aha, see? More than 1 million undocumented immigrants are in danger of losing health benefits as a result of Trump's cuts, but this assistance is provided by states and has nothing to do with Medicaid. Any reduction in Medicaid would be politically awkward for Trump, who promised repeatedly on the campaign trail that he would not touch basic safety nets such as Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. The president's loyal supporters in the MAGA movement have cautioned against this move. Steve Bannon, in fact, has been a persuasive voice within the movement, recently told listeners in his War Room podcast, you got to be careful because a lot of MAGA is on Medicaid. Well, they won't care about that. Josh Hawley, as you know, Republican senator from Missouri, recently said that slashing health insurance for the working poor would be politically suicidal. Well, we'll see who gets killed in all of this, and we'll decide then whether it was in fact suicidal. But all right, so that's the update on the legislative side. That was not happening much. Nothing changed over the weekends, but that will be the focus of work on Capitol Hill this week. Let's let's see. Maybe I can shoehorn this little bit in here before we take our first break. Not the whole article, but the latest pardon has dropped. And well, long story shorted on this one. Trump pardons former sheriff convicted of bribery. It was from right here in Virginia. Reuters reporting that story. Essentially, a local sheriff, Culpeper County Sheriff, sort of central Virginia, I guess we would say, convicted essentially of taking some $75,000 in bribes in exchange for giving out auxiliary deputyships, essentially. Local businessmen throw them a couple $1,000s, and in exchange they get a badge and the right to carry a gun, and I guess go around pretending to be sheriff's deputies. And I don't know whether they try to arrest people or anything, but certainly more often than not, I'm sure it's about the gun thing and flashing the badge if you get stopped for speeding so that you won't be getting any tickets. It only works with county deputies, I suppose, but there you have it. I don't know. Maybe a badge works with state troopers too. Anyway, that's what was going on. He was convicted very, very recently, and so it was just sort of interesting to see the pardon come through. This man and his family were put through hell, and it was unfair, and the totally politicized Biden Justice Department. There, yargle bargle. He was convicted in March of this year, and there was a big press release from the acting U.S. attorney for the Western District of Virginia upon securing the conviction, and about how it was all about American values, what they were doing, and nobody's above the law, and yada yada, yargle bargle. Very interesting, but of course it happened in March of 2025, so Biden's fault somehow. And boy, the pardons are getting worse and worse. And guess why? Ed Martin's in charge. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Hey, I left you with a big cliffhanger. Did we get to this story? I don't think so. Ed Martin, who I'm pretty sure we mentioned that. Okay, we mentioned that his nomination to be permanent, normal, regular, not interim and not acting, U.S. Attorney for D.C. Failed and withdrew his nomination. It looked pretty bad, but we figured that Martin would land on his feet somewhere, probably still within the Justice Department. So he did. And we may have snuck it in the other day, but in case we didn't, or we didn't say it loud enough, he has landed a job as the pardon attorney for, well, the Department of Justice, but, basically working with the White House. Normally a very serious and learned person who has the sensitivities necessary to balance the equities, political and otherwise, and advise the president wisely. You might feel like it would be nice to pardon this person, but it has tremendous political implications or legal implications or whatever. And, and they're not used to seeing this much activity until sort of like the end of an administration, on the way out the door when they take care of all the controversial pardons. But Ed Martin, probably the worst, among the worst people you could pick for the job, given what the biases and insanity he demonstrated while he was working as interim, not acting U.S. attorney for D.C. And sure enough, right away has dived into it with a partisan edge. And so Ed Martin, I guess, must have advised on this pardon for the Culpeper County Sheriff. To give you, now that we have more time on the other side of the break, I can tell you a little about what Bo Erickson at Reuters wrote to summarize the details of this story. And by the way, what a horrible, horrible picture. I'm glad they picked a horrible picture of Trump, I guess, to illustrate this thing. And he looks awful and sweaty and gross. Anyway, the story here, Trump has issued a pardon on Monday for a former Virginia sheriff who was convicted last year of federal bribery charges. Now, I thought he was, that's surprising to me, although maybe it was the sentencing that was in March. That must be it, because I was pretty sure that there was a date on the press release associated with it of late March of this year. But I guess we'll double check. Anyway, convicted last year of federal bribery charges, averting prison time for the officer. Sheriff Scott Jenkins, which sheriff in Virginia is an elected position, I think. Is it everywhere? It's an elected position in Loudoun. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. Sheriff Scott Jenkins, his wife, this is Trump, his wife Patricia and their family have been dragged through hell, all caps on hell. Trump posted online issuing a full and unconditional pardon, which, by the way, you can't just do that online. I'm sure that I'm not sure. Of course not. I'm never sure that he actually did the paperwork. And if Martin is the one who's supposed to prepare it for him, much less likely on top of all that. Anyway, he will not be going to jail tomorrow, but instead will have a wonderful and productive life. Not sure what he's doing, but, Secretary of Defense, maybe, I guess, if Hegseth goes down. Jenkins, a former Virginia sheriff who served an area about 2 hours outside Washington, D.C., that's Culpeper, was convicted by a jury in December of 2024, for accepting more than $75,000 in bribes in exchange for appointments as auxiliary deputy sheriffs. I almost got as an auxiliary crossed up there. In March, Jenkins was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. So basically, all right, they got that conviction, I guess, under Biden. That's certainly true, December 2024. And that's what made Trump mad. But the sentencing happened under Trump. Why didn't the DOJ go to sentencing and said, you know what, we recommend nothing? I don't know. Because he'd never heard of him before. And then somebody must have gotten on Fox News, and that's the end of it. The bribes came from several people in the form of campaign contributions, and in exchange, they were sworn into deputy sheriff positions and received badges and credentials, according to court documents and evidence presented at the trial. The bribe payers were not trained or vetted and did not render any legitimate services to the sheriff's office, the Justice Department said at the time. Since his conviction, Jenkins has appealed directly to the Trump administration for relief and probably bought a lot of Trump coin. Just adding that myself. I believe wholeheartedly in the president, Jenkins said in April on a webinar hosted by the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, according to the NBC4 affiliate in Washington. I believe if he heard the information, I know he would help if he knew my story, Jenkins said, referencing Trump. In issuing a pardon, Trump, in his online post, called Jenkins a victim of an overzealous Biden Department of Justice. But for some reason, the Trump Department of Justice did not recommend no sentence for him. The top Justice Department official who announced Jenkins' conviction last year did not immediately respond to a request for comment. This latest pardon follows Trump's January pardon of almost everyone criminally charged with participating in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, a February pardon of the former Democratic governor of Illinois who was convicted for trying to sell President Barack Obama's vacated U.S. Senate seat, that's Blagojevich, and others. All right, that was a good enough quick summary. There's some excellent articles out there summarizing Jenkins' own activities, which I suggest you perhaps might want to take a look at if you want to see exactly what's going on here with the pardons. If that one, is bad but didn't bother you all that much, oh, I got worse. The Detroit News carries this bit of information on Ed Martin's other exploits. U.S. Justice Department pardon lawyer, that's Ed Martin, pledges. And remember, by the way, Ed Martin found the position empty because the previous pardon attorney held over from the Biden administration resigned when Trump asked her to write up a pardon that would allow Mel Gibson to have his guns back. That's what Trump was spending his time on. And she was just like, yeah, no, I'm out of here. So she's got a Substack now or something like it. Anyway, you should follow along, or maybe it's a podcast, or maybe it's both. I don't know. But anyway, the job was open. Ed Martin needed a job because the Senate was never going to confirm him as U.S. Attorney for D.C. Just too crazy. So instead, he got this job. So he's got some pardons in mind. And you may have some sense of what it's all about. I think his latest post on Twitter that garnered, public attention was "No MAGA left behind." Just, great for the pardon attorney to be working with. Anyway, the U.S. Justice Department's new pardon attorney said he is going to take a hard look. That usually means I'm going to, give a pardon to two men who are serving long prison terms. Of course, that's who gets pardons, for leading a conspiracy to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Yeah, who, by the way, recently turned up in the White House and, did the weird, obsequious knee bend thing to Trump, which maybe it's too bad. We're generally big supporters of the governor of Michigan, who herself has been through hell, including kidnapping plots, by the way, just for enforcing COVID restrictions, but also because she was a Democrat, and that's bad. But, I don't know. Now she looks a little bit silly. She looked a little silly when she was doing that anyway, but the big reward for coming in and bending the knee is the people who were convicted of plotting to kidnap and murder you, the sitting governor of a United States, one of the member states of the United States, the sitting governor of Michigan, maybe a pardon. How about that? On the pardon front, we can't leave these guys behind, Ed Martin Jr. said on the Brianna Morello show. Wow. Who's Brianna Morello? I have no idea. But I don't know. Whatever. There's money out there to produce 1 billion right-wing wackadoodle podcasts. And how's it going out there, everybody? In my opinion, these are victims just like January 6th, Martin said. This is really super outrageous, right? Referring to, of course, the victims just like January 6th, referring to the 1,500 people pardoned by Trump for crimes related to January 6th. Duh, but okay. The arrests of Barry Croft Jr. and his partner Seals, not really, but, I would have arrested them for their work in the 70s. The arrests of Barry Croft Jr., Adam Fox, and other anti-government extremists rocked the home stretch of the 2020 presidential election. Authorities said the cabal wanted to grab Whitmer, a Democrat, at her vacation home and start a civil war. Pardonable stuff. Croft, 49, and Fox, 42, were portrayed as leaders of this scheme. They were convicted of conspiracy in federal court in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 2022. Croft, a trucker from Delaware, was also found guilty of a weapons charge. But the Detroit News, adequately, I guess, setting this up for Ed Martin's claims. Like, oh, you notice that they say these two were portrayed as leaders of the scheme. Well, I say they weren't, or if they were, that I wish they weren't, and therefore we're going to pardon them. Croft was sentenced to nearly 20 years in prison, while Fox, a Grand Rapids man, got a 16-year term. They are being held at a prison in Colorado, the most secure in the federal system, unless, of course, Ed Martin gets your name. He'll break you out. Whitmer was never physically harmed. Martin called it a Fed-napping plot, not a kidnapping plot, apparently referring to the numerous undercover FBI agents and informants who had infiltrated the group and built the case. Interesting, given that the Fed is now Fed-napping people off the street in general and imprisoning them in El Salvador, but okay. He said it looked like the weaponization of government. I have complete confidence that we're going to get a hard look at it. The president will want to know the facts about it. No, he won't. Martin said, pledging to get on it as quick as I can, I promise. An email seeking comment from Whitmer's office wasn't immediately returned on Friday. In 2020, she blamed Trump for stoking mistrust and fomenting anger over coronavirus restrictions and refusing to condemn right-wing extremists. Later, when he was out of office, Trump cast doubt on the kidnapping scheme, calling it a fake deal, which I assume means fake news. Same thing. So, just letting you know, the U.S. pardon attorney hard at work at pardoning Republican MAGA sheriffs who take bribes to give out badges, and if that's not bad enough for you, pardoning the people plotting to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. You might think this represents some sort of breakdown of public law and order in all of this. And you might even be right about that. And I saw an article over the weekend that I thought would make a great addition to our understanding and the language that we use to describe this stuff, because we keep pointing out that the media lacks the language, I think, to discuss this stuff adequately. And though this is more academic language, it might lead us to find a way to help the media along in figuring out what's going on. It's a piece in The Atlantic, and it is Leah Littman and Daniel Deacon. Leah Littman, I think I see all over social media. Maybe I see Daniel Deacon there too, and I just don't remember. But doesn't Leah Littman have I think she's got like a cartoon of herself as her avatar there, and I think the name rings a bell, and I think it's because of the cartoon. Anyway, get yourself a cartoon avatar so you make a dent in my memory. How to hide a constitutional crisis. Intriguing, but not the most intriguing part of the thing. The executive branch is relying on the language of the law as cover to claim that it is complying with court orders when in fact it is not. We've absolutely been talking about the problem of getting the administration to follow and obey consistently and for the long term court orders, and how they are very often simply defying them, but complicating things such that, and I don't know if we've ever really expressed it, but I feel like it's been fairly obvious to us that they seem to express themselves in terms that make it look like they're trying to make some kind of good faith, even if it's obviously not good faith, argument about interpretation of what they've been ordered to do. What I mean is, like when we've mentioned stuff like a case that is directly relevant to another case, or a case involving Trump, or if the Trump administration is ordered to return or not to deport anybody from the XYZ detention center in the Western District of Texas, because the case is brought there. And they say it doesn't say we can't move them from the Eastern District of Texas, right? Things like that, where it's like, well, it's really anybody similarly situated should find that they have the same protections. It's not always the case, but certainly when there's a nationwide injunction, that is the case. That's the whole point of having a nationwide injunction. But yeah, they come up with legalistic or sometimes not even all that legalistic, but just hair splitting to avoid the impact of the order. Well, Leah Littman and Daniel Deacon put a much better description to it and organized their thoughts a lot better than I have along the way. And here it goes. America seems to be waiting for a clear indication that the country is in a constitutional crisis. An engraved invitation, if you will, when you were kids, right? What are you waiting for? An engraved invitation? All right. Perhaps President Donald Trump will say at some point, I am defying a court order, and good luck trying to do anything about it. But short of that, America's constitutional crisis was always going to be a bit subtler, and that subtler crisis is already here. The administration is already flouting court orders. It's just that rather than admitting so, executive branch officials are saying one thing but doing another. That's called lying, of course. We have spent the past few months surveying the second Trump administration's practice regarding court orders and reviewed dozens of cases. We observed a clear pattern. There's some links here, too, so you can take a look at when they say we observed a clear pattern. We're in a paper abstract to which they link. So this is a description of their academic paper on the subject, which is why it has much more academic language involved, I guess. The administration uses the language of the law as cover to claim that it is complying with court orders when in fact it is not. Right, that was in the subheader. What does this mean? Well, first, the terminology. We call this legalistic noncompliance. A term that I assume, I don't know whether they coined it or not, but it's enclosed in quotes here, so it implies that this is a specific term of art. We call this legalistic noncompliance, a term intended to capture how the administration has deployed an array of specious legal arguments to conceal what is actually pervasive defiance of judicial oversight. That's it. That's it. Well described. It is a powerful strategy as it obscures the substance of what the administration is doing with the soothing language of law. And here, so the newspapers are frozen in place. Well, he's making an argument. He's in court, making an argument, to borrow from a few good men, but in a different context. Although the country is not yet 6 months into the second Trump administration, already many examples of this phenomenon have emerged. Consider some of the arguments that have come up in the litigation over the Alien Enemies Act, which involves the president's attempt to designate certain Venezuelan nationals as, quote, alien enemies and imprison them in El Salvador with little judicial process. I'm going to have to back up and read the pocket version of this, I think. Although, I don't know. Yesterday, this whole thing was available to me, but because it was, I don't know. I guess it was shared as a gift link, but then disappeared, and that's too bad because, dang, I need to engineer a way to find the rest of this because this is really quite fascinating. And a quickie subscription to the Atlantic isn't in the offing at the moment. Let me see if I can't open this up a separate way. No, apparently not. All right, well, that's too bad because it was really well put in all of this. And I read the whole thing through yesterday, so I'm sure that, maybe it's a time-limited thing. But I'll see if I can't arrange to find a gift subscription to it or just break down. I'm a little worried about subscribing to the Atlantic because they're just a little iffy. And I'd be subsidizing a lot more annoying departures from reason than good stuff, I think. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe the good stuff would outweigh them. Too bad. And as a matter of fact, there's a new piece from Adam Serwer, which I think we would benefit from, which I do have a gift link to. But I wouldn't be surprised if I had a gift link to the Leah Littman story out there, too. And I wonder if I might be able to find it and do so quickly. Yeah, there's Leah Littman's cartoon avatar. And she may have been out there providing a gift link to it. I don't know whether they allowed you to do that or not. I mean, she's giving the gift link to Adam Serwer's new piece. But, the question is whether or not she's giving out gift links to her own piece. Because here's the Atlantic's version. There we go. There's the gift article. someone else has done that. But I guess maybe policy is such that you don't give out too many gift articles of your own thing. You want to sell subscriptions. And it almost worked. Where were we with this one? I'm sorry. I have to borrow the gift subscription, at least for the moment. After the initial hearing in the case on the Alien Enemies Act, right, and imprisoning people in El Salvador, at the initial hearing in the first case challenging the AEA designation, the district court ordered the administration to turn around any planes that had departed for El Salvador. You remember this, right? The judge told the government that any people on a plane, quote, that is going to take off or is in the air, unquote, must, quote, be returned to the United States. However that's accomplished, whether turning around a plane or not disembarking anyone on the plane, right? So that's the order. Turn those planes around, stop any planes that are going to take off, turn anybody around that's already in the air, bring them back, no matter how you do it. The court also directed the government not to remove any additional people from the U.S. under the AEA proclamation. The government followed neither order. Instead, it landed at least 2 planes in El Salvador and transferred its involuntary passengers to a MAGA prison. So what's going on here? The government nonetheless insisted that it had complied with the court's orders. How, right? The government first argued that the judge's directive to, quote, not remove anyone else pursuant to AEA merely prohibited the government from taking people within the borders of the United States to anywhere outside of those borders. Because the planes had already left U.S. airspace, you remember these claims? At the time of the order, they were not, quote, removing anyone. That argument relied on a technical, legal parsing of what it means to remove someone. It's also utterly baseless. In various immigration and migration matters, to remove someone means to take them to another country where they are then allowed to enter. So if you take somebody to another country and the country refuses them, that's not a removal, apparently. But they just pretended it was. And because they're outside of United States borders, you can't turn it around. Although, again, the order is turn the planes around. The planes are being piloted by people subject to U.S. jurisdiction. It doesn't matter that they're outside of the country. They're on board a plane registered in the United States. They left from the United States. They're returning to the United States. They're under the jurisdiction of the United States. I don't know I don't know how they deal with, international waters on things like that. I mean, there are certain laws that I suppose don't apply in the same way, but given that those planes are the property of and leased by the United States government or chartered by the United States government and eventually land back in the United States, you could wait till they get back there and then say, you defied our orders. But at any rate, it didn't matter because the removal thing doesn't make any sense. Their interpretation of removal is just not the one that's ever been the case in legal use. But more fundamentally, the theory totally ignored that the judge had directly said, turn the planes around, and his emphasis on the importance of the United States not relinquishing custody or control of people to El Salvador. That was the order. We didn't remove anybody. Yeah, well, the whole point of the order was this, and you ignored it. In the course of the same proceeding, the government put forward several other weak legal arguments. It maintained, for example, that the district court abruptly revoked its earlier direction to turn any planes around, they said, because the court did not specifically repeat that direction in the written order that it issued after ruling orally. So the judge says, listen, you need to turn those planes around. Return those people now. All right? Okay, everyone agrees with that. Now, let me prepare my written order. And I didn't write down turn those planes around. I just said return everybody to the United States. Aha! It was different. When you gave the order orally, you said turn the planes around. When you wrote the order down later, you didn't say the words turn the planes around. Therefore, the government argued several times that the court's orders the court's written orders controls here. Now that's again sort of a legal term of art. Which one is the controlling language, the oral order or the written order? And again, this is something that serious lawyers will debate, but that they just adopted. And this really has the feel of Stephen Miller all over it. Just not a lawyer, but just thinks he's smart enough to just sort of become a lawyer when he learns enough terminology. Which language controls? Well, there's really specific jurisprudence on that. And it says the opposite of what you wanted to say, but you adopted the language of controls there and threw that in there to make it look like you were making a legal argument, whether you understood the argument or not, but you weren't. The government argued several times that the court's written order controls using language that sounds like law. But here, too, the government's legal analysis was nonsense. The district court's written order incorporated by reference, another term of art, the terms of the earlier hearing. In other words, the written order says all prior oral orders, etc., given in court are included herein, but here's a written ticket for you to take and say we now have a court order. You can't show up and flash an oral order at anybody down in El Salvador to get them to return people or not disembark people from the plane. Instead, you can bring them this. Incorporating by reference, it says in the written order, everything that was said orally at the hearing is included herein. That's what incorporation by reference means. And yet they said, it doesn't say the language over again. So that must mean they changed their minds when it very specifically does not. The district court's written order incorporated by reference the terms of the earlier hearing. The government gave no other reason to think that the district court had done a 180. But that was their argument. Isn't that really rather fascinating? There is also, of course, the case, they're not even talking about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia yet at this point, but now they're beginning to. The man mistakenly deported to El Salvador because of an administrative error. In that case, of course, the district court ordered the administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. You all know about that. And in and out of court, the administration has insisted that it has no control over someone who is in the custody of a foreign sovereign. That argument, too, is presented in the trappings of law, invoking concepts such as custody and sovereignty. But applied to the facts, it makes little sense. Trump has admitted that he could get Abrego Garcia back with a mere phone call to President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, who is holding American deportees. Well, you know that story. I'll tell you more in a minute. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm seeing some other stories flashing across the screen. I'm already interested, but I want to finish this one because this is super important. So again, we left off kind of in mid-sentence because we were going to get cut off. But as we were saying here, when the administration argues in court that, well, we can't free Abrego Garcia because we have no control over him anymore. He's in the custody of a foreign sovereign, right? Like if someone has been arrested in Russia and they're charged with, as they sometimes charge them, espionage, whatever it is, whatever the charge is, if they're being held in a Russian prison, we have to negotiate with the Russian government to get them to agree to release them, that it's up to them. Well, that's when they're being held there by the foreign government on foreign charges. Here, of course, we know that Trump has admitted in interviews that he could get Abrego Garcia back with a mere phone call to President Bukele of El Salvador, who is holding American deportees, yes, but not simply as foreign sovereign of El Salvador. They didn't violate El Salvador's laws and get arrested by El Salvador's police, convicted by a jury in El Salvador, and serving a term, but rather they are being held pursuant to an arrangement with the United States. We're paying them to hold them for having violated U.S. law. There's no reason at all to believe that this is all up to some foreign sovereign. That's not the law under which they're being held. But, you just bring that up. Well, they're being held by a foreign sovereign. That seems to work in other cases. Yeah, but there's reasons that it works in those cases and not in this case. The facts are different. You're not analyzing the facts, or you certainly don't want to analyze them correctly anyway. So you're just adopting it's like you read other cases where you couldn't get someone freed because they were being held by a foreign sovereign and said, there you go, that's what's happening here. You didn't read the fact pattern, or if you did, you didn't understand how it's different. The administration's practice of legalistic non-compliance has extended well beyond the high-profile AEA litigation. In the case challenging the administration's freeze on funds designated for the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, right? The government implausibly asserted that it had complied with the court's order halting the freeze, even though, after the order, it canceled all but 500 of the more than 6,000 USAID contracts. The administration asserted that in mere weeks' time, it had canceled all of the contracts through a process permitted by the court's order, an individualized one-by-one analysis of every single contract that somehow determined whether each arrangement was performing. Do we make sense of that quickly? Essentially, the court said, look, you can't just wholesale terminate all the contracts. The government has some rights in terminating contracts with USAID if there's non-performance of the contract, but it has to be done on an individualized basis. You need to perform an analysis. If the government determines that the contract is non-performing, you can, on an individual basis, terminate the contract. So they took that and said, all right, we determined that on an individual basis. And the court is stuck saying, wait, well, how could you have possibly done? There's no way you could have done an individualized analysis of 5,500 of these contracts and determined that they were all non-performing in the last 2 weeks. You're faking it, is what's happening here. But, they're stuck saying, well, can you prove that we faked it? Maybe we're just really fast workers. We're super geniuses, and we've been working overnight and over the weekends. Remember, we kept telling you all that? That's our superpower. Plus, we maybe we used AI to help us do the analysis faster. And the court, being legalistic themselves, are kind of stuck saying, well, we didn't define what it would require to do a genuine individualized analysis of any particular contract. We just said, if you can come back here and tell the court, under penalty of perjury, that you did in fact conduct that level of analysis, we could dispute that, but then we'd have to have an evidentiary hearing about why we believe that to be the case. But we just didn't think, essentially, that you would come back here and lie. But the order gave them room to do that. Well, you need to perform these individual things. All right, then we did. Says who? Says us. Well, can you prove that you did? Can you prove we didn't? That's kind of where we are. The administration took a similar tack in the litigation over the future of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, after a district court ordered the government to halt its stop work orders to CFPB employees and its mass terminations at the agency. The government nevertheless sent dismissal notices to more than 1,000 CFPB employees. The government claimed that it did so not pursuant to the policy blocked by the court. You cannot give out wholesale firing notices. There has to be reasons, individualized reasons for each one. All right, so stop giving them out. Fine, I will stop giving out firing notices on a mass basis. Instead, all at once, I individually found that you all needed to be terminated. That's what happened. Rather, it said it had done the firings as the court would have had it, individually assessing whether each of the employees should be retained, while also analyzing whether CFPB could perform its statutory functions without certain employees, right? You're not allowed to fire anybody unless you do an individualized review and determine that CFPB can complete its mission with this person gone. Okay, fine. I'm done. I did it. What? No, you didn't. Well, you can't prove I didn't. Literally what's happening here. Some may understandably view the government's practice of legalistic noncompliance as preferable to a world of outright noncompliance. Like, instead of saying, we don't have to do the individualized review that you say we did, we just will say, screw you, we're dismissing these people anyway. That would be worse. Well, I guess I see what you mean. But they also don't have to do the individualized analysis if they just say, we did it already. So how much worse is it really? But okay, they don't want them saying, we don't even have to listen to you. We don't even have to pretend to do an analysis. Instead, you're saying, we will pretend to do an analysis. That's it. In other words, so why would people think that this is possibly better? Well, that is, where the executive branch explicitly asserts the power not to comply with court orders, that would be worse. After all, with legalistic noncompliance, the government at least frames its arguments in the language of law and claims that it is trying in good faith to comply. Legalistic noncompliance is still quite concerning. For one thing, it lowers the public salience of noncompliance. The overwhelming majority of the public views noncompliance as a Rubicon that should not be crossed. If the administration were to openly assert the power not to comply with court orders, that would likely provoke significant public opposition and political pushback. Legalistic noncompliance, by contrast, allows the government to pursue noncompliance, but without many of its attendant costs. So, in fact, it's worse. Legalistic noncompliance can look a lot like lying. The government insisting that it is obeying an order when it's simply not. It does look a lot like lying, doesn't it? But it's more than that. By advancing outlandish arguments in such a wide range of cases and to a judiciary controlled by a conservative Supreme Court, the administration is hoping to wear down the courts through sheer force of will. And it's banking on the fact that in some cases those courts will assist the government's efforts to weaken judicial oversight of its actions. In this respect, consider that although legalistic noncompliance avoids signaling to American citizens that they need to be concerned about compliance, it sends a different message to judges and executive branch officials. The judges assessing the administration's arguments, as well as the officials making them, can see that the administration is not complying with court orders, and with no valid reason. That dynamic, in turn, could lay the groundwork for outright noncompliance. It could also produce something we call legalized noncompliance. Not legalistic, but legalized noncompliance, where courts, fearful of outright noncompliance, issue rules that allow judges to say the administration is complying with court orders, when in reality the administration is doing little or nothing to carry out a court's ruling. If you just say, well, they're not doing it, but are you in compliance with our order or not? Well, they're not doing it, so they must be out of compliance, right? Yeah, but I hereby rule that they're in compliance, because the real outcome, that they're not in compliance, puts us directly into immediate constitutional crisis, and I just don't want to be responsible for that. And over the weekend, by the way, related story, but not discussed herein, the judicial conference apparently spent some time, I guess last week, and then reported over the weekend that they're considering organizing their own security arrangements and to no longer rely on the United States Marshals Service for judicial security, both inside the courtroom and elsewhere, the personal security of federal judges, because, of course, the United States Marshals Service is under the control of the executive branch, and judges are apparently legitimately, and I think correctly, worried that the administration will simply give orders to the U.S. Marshals, either a wholesale or on an individual basis. Don't show up to protect the person of this judge who has ruled in a way that has made the president unhappy. Don't arrest people who come into their courtroom with guns for whatever reason. Don't escort them home or to their car or whatever it is, or stay outside their house when they have been received specific threats to their safety. Just don't. And if that worries judges, they may also just say, well, you're not in compliance with my order, but let's just say you are, so that this case, moves along and you're not mad at me anymore. Some indications that the Supreme Court has already legalized partial noncompliance have emerged, to continue with their piece in the Atlantic. The court has, for example, made it harder to challenge a number of the administration's actions, which reduces the odds of an unfavorable court ruling that might result in explicit noncompliance. The Supreme Court has also adopted legal standards that give courts and executive branch officials considerable wiggle room within which to maneuver, and specifically to insist that the executive branch is complying with a court order, even though it is not doing that at all. In the Abrego-Garcia case, for example, the Supreme Court told the lower court that it could direct the government to facilitate Abrego-Garcia's return, but questioned whether the court could order the government to, quote, effectuate it. The government has seized on that distinction and continuing to fight Abrego-Garcia's release, right? It's created a legal controversy or a legal question that didn't exist before. When you say facilitate his return, what do you mean by that? Well, I mean, effing return him. And if you say it's not up to you and it's up to El Salvador to initiate the process, then get El Salvador to initiate the process as the service provider here. You tell them, we're the ones paying, you put them on a bus, and then we'll facilitate the rest of the return. But you can't say effectuate, and the Stephen Millers of the White House and of the world are saying effectuate means get the job done. Facilitate means I could ask, but they don't seem to be answering. At the same time, the president's dwindling support, coupled with continued public focus on the AEA litigation and Abrego-Garcia's case in particular, may make it easier for courts to push the administration to comply with their orders, not just with words, but with actions as well. In an encouraging sign, a district court in Massachusetts acted swiftly this past week when lawyers alleged that the federal government was on the brink of violating an order prohibiting it from removing people to third countries, i.e. to countries other than those designated in removal proceedings, with little process. Okay, so got the whole thing there. Moving people to third, and this has to do with deporting Venezuelans and Cambodians and Vietnamese to South Sudan. These are, again, the third countries not designated in removal proceedings. I'm not moving you your country of origin. I'm taking you somewhere else. And doing so with little process. The government had put a Burmese national and a Venezuelan national, among others, on a plane to South Sudan, a country under threat of renewed civil war, of course. After hearing from the lawyers, the judge directed the government to maintain custody and control over these individuals so that they could not be transferred, possibly irrevocably, to a foreign sovereign, just like they're claiming was the case in El Salvador. Again, using the language of legal, the legalistic language. Well, sorry, they're in the control of a foreign sovereign. Well, I know that's your excuse in El Salvador. It shouldn't be working, but to prevent that from happening in South Sudan, you are hereby prohibited from transferring these people to the control of the South Sudan government. The judge also made plain that the department's actions in this case are unquestionably violative of this court's order. So there it is. And the court required the government to give the men notice of what could amount to weeks of additional process to assert claims for relief. As a strategy, legalistic noncompliance has force only when each case is viewed in isolation and not subject to public scrutiny. But if courts and the public start to recognize the pattern, as explained here, it could and should lose its power. So that's the end of the article. We got to the end of that one. And I didn't put aside anything about the judicial conference and their decisions or their discussions about security. But let me see if I can't find some news about that. Here we are. It's in the Wall Street Journal, where I can't really read it, but Brendan Nyhan noticed it and took a little excerpt here. But the Wall Street Journal article, an exclusive, judges weigh taking control of their own security amid threats. The subheader here reads, U.S. Marshals sworn to protect federal judges, sort of, I guess, ultimately answer to President Trump, who has ramped up criticism of the judiciary. And one Mike Walker here, grabbing the article and adding the comment, amid rising tensions between the Trump administration and the judiciary, some federal judges are beginning to discuss the idea of managing their own armed security force. I have reason to guess, based on the context here, that Mike Walker then may be the author of this piece, perhaps. Let's take a quick look and see if we can find that out. No, but just an interpretation of the piece. Former DOD, VA, and FEMA senior official, defender of the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law. Good job, Mike Walker. We're glad that that's the case. But then Brendan Nyhan taking Mike Walker's comment and adding, the Security Committee members of the Judicial Conference, a policymaking body for the federal judiciary, worried that Trump could order the marshals to stand down in retaliation for a decision that didn't go his way. A real statement about the president in 2025, why democracy is in grave danger. And that sums it up. That really needs to be read in parallel with this other piece. I think quite obviously related, and perhaps one of the reasons that some judges might in fact end up backhandedly legalizing some of this non-compliance. So legalistic non-compliance, that is the excuses that they offer, and then legalized non-compliance, which is what they're hoping to get out of the arguments of legalistic non-compliance. If it's clear that we're not going to comply and you don't want to be the one that provokes the final crisis, just give us a pass. Legalize our non-compliance. It is rather amazing. All right. Let's see. A couple of other things that, captured my attention along the way that should probably be added to the pile. Let's see. I'm not certain. I didn't have an immediate plan for what to do next, now that I can't read the Wall Street Journal article, and I can't subscribe to all these things. There's just too many, which I guess is good news. I'm glad that there's a wide variety of publications that occasionally, if not always, but occasionally do provide some valuable and interesting analysis and even pushback on the Trump administration. It's still too far. And what am I trying? It's too few and far between, I guess. But it's at least the case that this is not isolated writing. It might be in the Wall Street Journal, but the opinion section tends to be a little wacky. But the news reporters seem to be doing a decent job of it, generally speaking. All right. You know what? Here's something that I wanted to add here. I read the bulk of this article, perhaps last week, in Public Notice when Paul Waldman had written this thing, Donald Trump and the Power of the Big Fake Number, right? Don't believe the hype about his, quote, deals and ding ding, and why we always ding ding every time he says the word deals. The last section of this piece we did not get to, which was the number is the tell. And I guess, it rang a bell in my head of like the 2 weeks thing, whenever he says, we're going to be coming out with that very shortly, very short period of time, about 2 weeks or so. Pretty clear indication that it's not happening. Speaking of which, I was just wondering this morning, did he ever get to Fort Knox to inspect the contents and make sure that the gold is all still there? I was just wondering about that. Apparently not. I was thinking about it in the context of his announcement, something else we didn't get to from over the weekend. All of a sudden, we're going to have 50% tariffs on the EU, although I think he announced that maybe before the end of last week. because I recall it still being the working week when he said, oh, yeah, by the way, out of the blue, all European trade, 50% tariffs because reasons. And I think he pointed out I think his claim was, well, because we have a trade deficit with the EU of $250 million. But I think he probably meant $250 billion. It's not accurate, $250 billion. Neither is $250 million. $250 million, of course, would be, that's loose change in trade deficit world, as between Europe, the entirety of Europe, and the United States. 250 billion would be maybe more problematic, but apparently it's not anything quite like that. Paul Krugman wrote an article that I also have tucked away here, and we can get to, saying that it's probably a little closer to 100 billion, but also saying that in the context of trade deficits, not really actually a very big deal at all. And of course, he's got a weird idea about why trade deficits are bad, and they're really not bad in themselves. But his particular weird definition of it, that is to say Trump's, if we buy something from someone, we have a trade deficit with them. Yeah, well, I guess so. And Krugman, picks up on that. I go buy my groceries at the bodega around the corner. I have a trade deficit with them because I don't think they subscribe to my Substack. But is that bad? We're all getting what we want out of this deal, right? Anyway, perhaps we'll get to that later. But here, the number is the tell. Paul Waldman summing up just basically how Trump throws out fake numbers all the time, but specifically why the fake numbers. And they're not usually, out of the blue round figures or estimates say. They have they're very specific numbers, and that serves a particular purpose, even though eventually we catch on. 2 weeks. Well, I guess, but now we know that that's his tell, but I guess originally that was, why do you say, if you ever asked him about it, or if his son said, Dad, I need fatherly advice. Why do you say 2 weeks on everything? Should I be saying 2 weeks on everything? Oh, you should, because 2 weeks is, it's not close enough for anybody to say, like tomorrow, if they follow up and say, well, whatever happened to that thing? You said, well, it's not time yet, 2 weeks. But it's also enough time for people to forget about it and move on to other things so they never ask follow-up questions. And if they do, then you say, well, 2 weeks, it was an approximation. Maybe it'll be 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know. I was just trying to say that pretty soon. The thing is, we're working on it, right? It's a big dodge, and it's got enough specificity to it that most people won't bother. And here's the same argument made here. As the most prodigious liar in the history of politics, Trump employs or deploys many different kinds of falsehood and puffery. Ask him about the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen. Oh, God. We remember that one, right? Served it to President Xi in his visit to Mar-a-Lago, as though it meant something. Anyway, most of which we've gotten used to, all of these different kinds of falsehood and puffery. But Trump's use of specific dollar figures is troubling precisely because its specificity is meant to communicate something real and concrete. It attracts reporters who repeat the figures without taking the time to look too closely, thereby making them the conduit for Trump's deception. It's fitting that so many of the recent iterations of this technique revolve around artificial intelligence. This took a turn I wasn't expecting, like the lawnmower outside has just taken a turn that I wasn't expecting, although I should have come to expect it. We've fixed the gutters so the dripping is gone. It's not raining today, but hopefully that means no dripping when it rains again next time. But no rain means lawnmowers, so, trading one noise for the other. But, okay, why are we taking a turn towards artificial intelligence? How did that happen? At the end of Joe Biden's time in office, his administration put restrictions on the export of computer chips meant for AI systems, banning them entirely to adversaries such as Iran and China, and capping exports to all but 18 close American allies. I don't think I took notice of this. The deals with Gulf countries, the deals, ding ding, that Trump just made with the Gulf countries he visited, would effectively remove those limits, at least for them, but maybe for everybody, would remove those limits in addition to military hardware and Trump's goodwill. That's what they wanted most of all. access to the hundreds of thousands of chips needed to run AI at a large scale. And again, we had the opportunity, I guess, to try and make a run at being the world leader in AI by building all of those AI processing centers here in the United States. I don't know that that's necessarily a good idea, but the Gulf states wanted to build their own, and there was no point in building them if they couldn't get the chips. So in addition to getting military hardware and being on Trump's good side, that's what they wanted. So AI, he says, is a perfect vehicle for this brand of chicanery. How do you like that? Why? Because so much of it is built on hype. Absurdly optimistic predictions about the future, mind-boggling numbers that its boosters discourage us from interrogating too closely, and assurances of music time, assurances of beneficial economic transformation. That economic transformation is upon us far sooner than any reasonable person believes. Trump may not be able to tell you what AI is, but he knows like-minded hype artists when he sees them. And when they all get together, whether it's American tech barons looking to raise billions or Gulf sheiks eager to get their hands on computer chips, we should start from the assumption that when Trump throws out a mind-boggling dollar figure, it's probably BS.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One more segment to go in our big Tuesday return. And by the way, we had kind of cut a word or two probably out of the end of Paul Waldman saying, basically though, he was saying when there's when Trump mentions a mind-boggling dollar figure, especially when we're talking about this is mind-boggling dollar figures that are going to be invested in the U.S. in particular, then almost certainly BS, as has always been the case. I thought it was interesting to throw in the AI thing there. That seemed kind of extraneous, but it was a great way of working in the reminder that that was part of the deals, ding ding, made during his Middle Eastern trip. There's really no good reason for national security or for business-wise, really, why all of that should be going. Like when in the first Trump administration, they were working so hard, and Mike Flynn was working so hard to get nuclear technology to the Gulf states. Like we need it for, a nuclear power program. Oh, really? The guys with unlimited petroleum, and probably if they wanted it, unlimited solar power, I would imagine. You need to have nuclear energy instead. Maybe, but on the surface, this is the sort of thing that if Biden were interested in transferring the nuclear technology to them, Trump would immediately say, they have all the gas in the world, all the oil, and they could have solar anytime they want. Anytime they want. Even though here in the United States, what if it's not sunny? Well, but you don't have that problem in the desert. I'm sure he'd be able to convince MAGA that was the case. I'm not sure if it's that simple, but I do have my suspicions when it comes to transferring nuclear technology anywhere, I guess, but also Middle East. I don't know, nuclear stuff. Is that good? Because I thought we were arguing about that with Iran. They're not Middle East per se, but still. Anyway, Makes me wonder. So, okay, what might be a good follow-up? Oh, yes, right. I had mentioned to you that there was, the tariff thing, of course. All right, I grabbed the AP article about that. And that, I guess we should point out, so I guess end of last week, there's going to be 50% tariffs on Europe, and we'll talk about the reasons why he thought that was a good idea. It wasn't, but why did he think so? Why did he think it was necessary? Paul Krugman will address that. But also, before we even got to that, and before anybody could, I guess it's a good thing it happened before anybody could plan for 50% tariffs, because why bother? That he already caved on that. The president of the European Commission, is that right? Is that the right terminology? Allegedly called him up, called me on my phone, and we spoke and had a good conversation, and I've agreed to delay it. She asked me, she begged me, actually, please, sir. Tears were streaming, running down her eyes, and she asked me to please delay the tariffs, and I did. Instead of going into effect on June 1st, which is like a week from now, less at this point, we said July 9th. July 9th will be the time. I don't know why July 9th. Is that a Monday? I didn't look it up. I don't know. After July 4th, and then after the fireworks or something. Anyway, that's the new news. So why was Trump interested in tariffs on Europe at all? And the answer is bad information and a poor understanding of what's going on. And Paul Krugman gives us this, but he gives it in a form of a letter to Europe in which he encourages them that they are stronger than they think and they should act like it. Which, of course, will eventually, I assume, drive Trump to say, this is treason. He's giving advice to the other countries. Don't put it past him. On Friday, Donald Trump, claiming that he was unhappy with European negotiating tactics, announced his intention to impose 50% tariffs on goods imported from the European Union. So it really was Friday, huh? A rate that high would virtually shut down transatlantic trade. Remember, that would be 50% tariffs, higher than the 30% tariffs, which is still way too high, that he's imposing on China, who's not our friend. But 50% for our friends somehow, except they're not our friends. They're old Europe. Remember that, by the way. That was not Trump. Old Europe. That was George W. Bush, the reasonable guy, where Dick Cheney was in charge. Anyway, Dick Cheney. Wow. Anyhow, a rate that high would virtually shut down transatlantic trade, which I think for a couple hundred years has been super important, but you tell me. On Sunday, though, after talking with Ursula von der Leyen, that's my best guess at the pronunciation, unless she has the extra syllable in there, Leyen. It's Leyen, von der Leyen. Leyen. I'll ask Ursula what she thinks. The president of the European Commission, he announced, that is Trump, Ursula was not, he announced that the tariffs would be postponed until July 9th. Now, Paul Krugman goes on to say, I have no idea what von der Leyen said. And I'd also note that a huge threatened tariff that may or may not happen in 6 weeks does a lot to increase destructive uncertainty. But let me offer some advice to the Commission and the EU as a whole, because there's no point in offering that advice to Donald Trump. Don't try to appease Trump. You can't make any substantive concessions because your policies toward U.S. exports are already quite favorable. And even giving Trump some kind of symbolic, meaningless win will only embolden him, confirming his false belief that, quote, they've treated us very badly over the years, right? If you make a concession, even when it doesn't mean anything, 1, he won't know that it doesn't mean anything. 2, he knows that MAGA won't know that it doesn't mean anything. And 3, he's just going to say, a concession was made. That must mean I was right, that they've treated us very badly. Above all, Europe needs to overcome its learned helplessness. They're not going to like hearing that. And act like the great power it is. They might like to hear that. Especially given America's apparent determination to destroy the pillars of its own strength, right? About trade, he says, the EU and the US both have significant tariffs on a few of each other's products. But until Trump went on his rampage, average tariffs were very low, less than 2% in both directions. Trump and those around him rant about European value-added taxes. And it's true that U.S. producers have to pay, for example, 19% to sell to German consumers. Outrage, right? No, so do German producers. A VAT, value-added tax, is a sales tax, not an import barrier. So it doesn't put us on unequal footing with German products. What puts us on unequal footing is they say, I prefer German products. They advertise to me in German. Trump rages about Europe's trade surplus with America, but bilateral imbalances are normal and innocuous. And as I said, he does give that example. I run a large deficit with the bodega around the corner because I buy a lot of their groceries. A new word, by the way. I don't know if everybody knows that one. Or new usage of a very old word. They brought it back, groceries. I brought it back, as a matter of fact, in my campaign. So, all right, yeah, I run a large deficit with the bodega around the corner because I buy a lot of their groceries while they do not, as far as I know, subscribe to this Substack. Furthermore, there's less to that European surplus than meets the eye. Ready for some cool logistics stuff? Yes, Europe sells us more goods, physical stuff, like cars and olive oil, than it buys. But we sell them a lot more services, things like financial services and software design. Trump only talks about our deficit in goods, but our deficit in goods and services is significantly smaller. But wait, there's more. Besides some of our some of our reported deficits in goods is probably fictitious. What do you think of that? Yes, some chicanery, maybe. Why do we say that? Well, according to the official numbers, Ireland is responsible for 1/3 of the EU's trade surplus with America. It's the Lucky Charms, honestly. Delicious cereal, and just no American technology, no cereal technology equivalent to it. They're magically delicious. What are you going to do about that? They've got a relative advantage in magic. 'Cause leprechauns. This is science, all right? So keep up, everybody. Ireland is responsible for nearly 1/3 of the EU's trade surplus with America. Also, Irish Spring, terrific soap. No American Spring soap. You ever notice that? Okay, so that's because, according to these numbers, Ireland sells 6 times as much to the U.S. as it buys. They don't want the American Spring soap. Smells like toxic waste. Our, hard work charms, not nearly as magically delicious as the Lucky Charms. They just prefer luck to hard work. That's just because they have no work ethic over there, as you know. But they smell great, and they think that they were born with it. It's the soap. Anyway, that's what's going on here. Ireland sells 6 times as much to the U.S. as it buys. But this is almost certainly a figment of accounting trickery. Oh, yeah. What do you mean? What kind of accounting trickery? Well, it's kind of American, really. It's accounting trickery designed to avoid taxes. Aha. And here's how it works. An Irish subsidiary of a multinational company that manufactures, say, pharmaceuticals, sells the drugs at inflated prices to the U.S. subsidiary that markets the drugs here. That reduces reported profits and hence taxes in America, right? Oh, well, we had to buy them at inflated prices and then we sold them at even more inflated prices in the U.S. That's true. But the point is, we paid so much for these drugs from our Irish subsidiary that our margins are in fact very small and we can't be taxed on, or we owe very little tax. But of course, it's a multinational company. They own the Irish subsidiary too. So the extra money that they're paying to the Irish subsidiary ends up in their pockets, but just not being taxed by the United States. It's all kept outside of the U.S. And that also means it creates big, but basically imaginary profits in Ireland where corporate taxes are much lower. Why is Ireland the middleman and all this? Corporate taxes are low. So if you're paying inflated prices to the Irish subsidiary and pocketing those profits anyway because you own both the American subsidiary that buys the pharmaceuticals and the Irish subsidiary that sells them, what's the difference? You get the money and you get it at a lower tax rate by pretending the transaction takes place in Ireland. Got it? Those accounting maneuvers make it look as if Ireland, and hence the EU, to which they belong, is exporting a lot, but no jobs are created. It's only about the corporate bottom line. Yes, the EU should crack down on Ireland's role as a tax haven, but that hasn't been one of Trump's demands. When all is said and done, the EU's true trade surplus is probably less than $100 billion, which is basically rounding error compared with Europe's $19 trillion GDP. So, America has no legitimate grievances against the EU, nor does America, as Trump likes to imagine, hold the cards. The EU isn't highly dependent on the U.S. market, which buys only around 3% of what it produces. Of what Europe produces, I guess. U.S. corporations, which have invested trillions of dollars in Europe, are dependent on European goodwill. On Monday, Friedrich Merz, Germany's chancellor, warned that U.S. technology companies might be targets if the trade conflict escalates. That's a credible threat. But isn't Europe a declining society, increasingly becoming a museum of past success? I don't even know who said that, but apparently that's the knock on him now. No. Try spending some time in Europe, he says, not at overcrowded tourist destinations, but in cities and at companies where real people work. These are highly educated, highly competent nations where many things work quite well. It's true that European economic growth has lagged U.S. growth for a generation, a point strongly emphasized by last fall's Draghi report, which was, that's D-R-A-G-H-I, about which I know nothing, but which was a much-needed call for reform. But even that report acknowledged that Europe's lag is basically confined to the tech sector, that the rest of its economy remains quite dynamic. And apparently taken from the report is this paragraph. Excluding the main ICT sectors, the manufacturing of computers and electronics and information and communications activities, excluding all of that from the analysis, EU productivity has been broadly at par with the US during the period of 2000 to 2019. For 2013 to 2019, the role of ICT is even more striking as the EU productivity growth, excluding the main ICT sectors, exceeded that of the US by some margin. Obviously, lagging behind in the industries of the future is a big deal, and Europe needs to develop a strategy to catch up, but that catch-up may be easier than expected given Trump's administration's determination to engage in self-mutilation, crippling the scientific research and the research universities that drove past U.S. success. Of course, if Europe doesn't rise to the occasion, leadership may move to China instead, but that's a topic for another day. For now, the message for Europe is stand up for yourself. In trade, in GDP, even in everything but the most advanced technology, you are no more dependent on the United States than the U.S. is on you. There's nothing compelling you to cater to the delusions of America's mad king. Well, okay. I don't know. Do we wish him good luck on that one? Or what? I don't know. I don't know. You can't root against your own country, but there's no reason to root for it if the things it's demanding are ridiculous and total intentional misunderstandings of every part of our relationship with every other part of the rest of the world. Wow. So, all right. How about this? One other item that I should have added on Friday I don't remember whether it was Thursday or Friday or what. I don't remember. But we spoke a little bit about, I read you a piece, I don't remember whose piece it was, about the Humphreys executor decision and just kind of, bring us up to speed on why that was important. And I mentioned that Don Moynihan had a piece in his Substack on the same subject. And I thought it might be making more or less the same point. But I recommended that you read it just in case it was slightly different. And my second glance over it made me realize that there was a very distinct point being made, and perhaps we can close out with this one today. Why the Supreme Court's decision on firing independent agency heads is a big deal. You thought you knew, but you didn't know this one. I guess maybe you did, but Don Moynihan knew it too. The demise of Humphrey's executor and the rise of the unitary executive theory. What's going on? A question I've got from reporters is how long it will take the public sector to recover from the damage Trump has done. Good question. There is no easy answer to this, but I highlight one variable that will matter a lot. How much the Supreme Court embraces unitary executive theory, i.e., in layman's terms, I guess, that the president has king-like powers. Why does this matter? A maximalist interpretation of the unitary executive theory holds that almost any congressional or judicial constraints on presidential power are themselves unconstitutional. In more specific terms, it would hold that the civil service system itself is unconstitutional. If the court adopts that reasoning, then it becomes very hard to rebuild state capacity. That is a good point. Because with unitary executive theory, there is no actor that can make credible long-term commitments to public servants. In other words, the entire bureaucracy changes with every administration, and all they do is carry out the president's orders, whatever his whims may be that day. In the case of Donald Trump, there may be long-term planners among the rest of the future presidents if we ever return to normalcy. But what's the difference? At the end of the 4 years, just as there's a lame duck presidency in his last 6 months to a year, I mean, does the civil service hedge its bets and say, we just won't carry out this guy's instructions for the last year of his presidency, lest a political enemy be elected next time and slaughter us all? This is a very good point, and one that wasn't, I don't think, made very clearly in the other very good and very real reasons why the unitary executive theory is so dangerous. With unitary executive theory, we'll continue with Don Moynihan here, Congress cannot write robust new legislation that modernizes the civil service and stops politicization. A president could just ignore it. They could write it. They could pass it. A president could just ignore it, though. That's not super effective for anything. Even if Trump leaves office and a new president looks to restore nonpartisan competence, their promises are only good for 4 or 8 years before another president can come in and rip up the terms of their employment. And over time, why would even a good government president invest effort in restoring capacity if their successor can undermine it? That's a good point and a good question. Also relevant to what's going on and what has gone on over the past couple of weeks and over the weekend too at Harvard University, where once again the president is threatening all of their grant money, which I saw somebody make the excellent point, and I think I might even be able to kind of quickly credit that point if I can scroll fast enough. I reposted it over the weekend, but somebody said, yeah, we really should be referring to, here it is, Nick Carnes, author of White Collar Government and the Cash Ceiling, co-editor of The Politics of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I didn't expect that, but Nick making the very excellent point, we should stop calling these things grants and start calling them contracts, because that's really what is going on here. It's clearer to people why this is such an abuse of power if we do that. This wasn't a bunch of gifts. This was a bunch of binding contracts between researchers and the U.S. government for specifically agreed upon projects, right? So researchers at Harvard University and elsewhere where they're being threatened have contracts with the U.S. government to conduct this research for the benefit of the government of the United States, the people at large, all of consumers, whatever it may be, whatever they're developing. There's a contract here, and the United States government is reneging on those contracts. And that's going to make everything worse, more expensive, right? If you are a big fan of Trump projects, how much is this stupid Golden Dome thing going to end up costing? It's already going to be $1 bazillion anyway. But how much will it end up costing if all the defense contractors who are supposed to build the thing and develop it know that all those contracts can now be canceled on a whim, as I said this morning on Blue Sky, if Trump wakes up on the wrong side of the bedpan, for instance, right? And just decides, cancel it all. All the work is lost, all the work is destroyed, or nobody wants to do the work, or if they do take the contract, I imagine you have to double, triple the contract cost if you really think about the fact that your contract could be canceled after you ink it at any given time. If anything happens that displeases the president. One of the other developments over the weekend that I haven't mentioned so far is apparently, I did mention it last week that Trump had just announced sort of out of the blue, Apple, if they don't make their iPhones in the United States, Apple is going to have a tariff, 25% tariff on Apple products, maybe just the iPhone, maybe not. I don't know. Why Apple? Why not everybody else? And I think he did at some point say, well, smartphones all need to be made. Samsung could have that too, because it wouldn't be fair if Samsung didn't have it. Of course, he reserves the right to just not hit Samsung with it, but what does he care about Samsung? Why Apple? Apparently, Trump was mad that Tim Cook from Apple didn't get on the plane and come and grovel for contracts from the big Middle Eastern sheikdoms. And I didn't bring a very prestigious guy. They all want the Apple, and he didn't show. Tim Apple didn't show it. He embarrassed me. So now they're going to have a tariff. Boom. That's all it takes with these guys. Anyway, back to Don Moynihan, where we left off. Right. So why would defense contractors build Golden Dome, at least for a decent price, if they knew that they could lose their contract right away? Look at what happened to Apple. You piss off. You just don't go on a junket. All right, that embarrassed me. Why? You brought a bunch of other people, and I think Apple was even represented. It just wasn't by me. I don't like it. That's all it takes to lose your contract. How much are you going to bid to build Golden Dome? Anyway, as they say here in this context, over time, why would even a good government president invest effort in restoring capacity if their successor can undermine it? Same principle, even if it's not a contract for a specific, product to be provided, but for services. You run the government in exchange for this money contract. But if it can be revoked at any time, why would civil servants put time in? Why would presidents put time into trying to restore civil service? With unitary executive theory, the public sector becomes permanently viewed as an unstable and chaotic workplace that we're seeing now. The most capable potential employees decide it's not worth the bother, and the workforce becomes a mix of people who cannot get a job elsewhere and short-term political appointees. The irony here is that advocates of unitary executive theory say it's not just constitutional, but will actually improve the performance of the public sector, notwithstanding the omnishambles we're witnessing now. So it matters a lot how courts decide on questions of presidential power over personnel issues right now. We do not have many tea leaves to read, but this SCOTUS is certainly more on board with any unitary executive theory than any prior version. Decisions like this one like the one on presidential immunity last year suggests a court willing to imbue the president with unprecedented powers. SCOTUS gave us another hint yesterday, he means last week. They decided to allow Trump to remove Democratic members of the Merit Systems Protection Board and the National Labor Relations Board. The decision was 6-3. The court says that the president can move forward with the firing until they rule on the merits of the case, which is unlikely to happen until the next Supreme Court term. It's very hard to see the court deciding that the firings are fine now if there is a real prospect that they will change their mind in the future. It's like telling an arsonist, go ahead, we can figure out if it's legal or not after the house is a charred shell. This is a big deal. The de facto overturning of Humphrey's executor, the precedent that Congress can restrain the president's removal power, this standard, which held for 90 years, now appears to be on the chopping block. Congress might say that an official can only be removed for cause, like poor performance, but the president can ignore them. So that removes independent agency heads for any reason he deems fit. Unitary executive theory is relatively novel, nurtured by the Federalist Society and Republican lawyers who worked in government and were frustrated by congressional oversight. 5 of the 9 judges were Republican lawyers who worked in government, and all 6 Republican appointees have ties to the Federalist Society. Enacting unitary executive theory means effectively that current executive branch officials and past executive branch officials who are now on the Supreme Court would conspire to strip Congress of its powers. In constitutional terms, it is a resetting of the separation of powers to fit the beliefs of the contemporary Republican Party. Yeah, not so good either. And there's a lot more to this, of course, and we can't get through all of it, but just a little sampling to keep you interested and wanting to keep reading perhaps on your own. In writing the dissent, Justice Kagan rightfully asked why things are different now, beyond the fact that conservative majorities want to get on with getting rid of Humphrey's executors. Between Humphreys and now, 14 different presidents have lived with Congress's restrictions on firing members of independent agencies. No doubt many would have preferred it otherwise, but can it really be said after all this time that the president has a crying need to discharge independent agency members right away before this court, surely before next term, decides the fate of Humphreys on the merits? The impatience to get on with things, to now hand the president the most unitary, meaning also the most subservient administration since Herbert Hoover, and maybe ever, must reveal how that eventual decision will go. In valuing so highly in an emergency posture the president's ability to fire without cause Wilcox and Harris and everyone like them, the majority all but declares Humphreys itself the emergency. Kagan also pointed out the blazing hypocrisy of one of the aspects of the decision. Ending Humphrey's executor effectively means we will no longer have truly independent agencies, except one, not the Federal Reserve, for some reason.
NetworksRadio.com.
That's where it doesn't apply.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And who knows? I mean, I got no real reason to believe that they're going to preserve that one either if any Democratic president ever wanted to make those firings or hired somebody that a Republican successor wanted to fire. All right, time for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam once again for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we'll see you with Greg tomorrow.